His stadium did not have a name for the section where the humans sat. It had a number. Row 47C. The sign above the entrance to their tunnel was printed wrong. It said 47D, and had said so for 11 years, and every 4 years someone from the human delegation filed a correction request, and every 4 years the request was received, and processed, and placed into a review queue that moved at the speed of a glacier that had decided to stop moving. Sergeant Mara Voss walked into the stadium and found her seat by counting rows from the back. She sat down. The chair listed to the left. She did not adjust. All around her, 400 civilizations settled into their places. The stadium was the size of a small moon and smelled like ozone and something sweet that the Theresi secreted when they were pleased with themselves, which was always. The Theresi sat in the front row, in seats that reclined. Each seat had a built-in environmental adjustment panel. One of them was glowing gold because the Theresi who sat there preferred a slightly warmer ambient temperature, and the stadium had simply accommodated this the way it accommodated everything the Theresi wanted, which was quietly and without being asked. Mara looked at the front row, then she looked at her chair, which listed to the left. "That's a thing that's happening," she said. Nobody around her heard her. The noise in the stadium was enormous. 100 languages and 50 communication frequencies all broadcasting at once. The kind of sound that pushed against the inside of a skull like something wanted out. Ambassador Adjunct Cale Thun filed a noise complaint at 0912 hours, 14 minutes before the opening ceremony began. He filed it from his seat 3 rows above the human delegation, where he always sat. Not with the humans. His position did not require proximity, but close enough to observe. He had been close enough to observe for 19 years. He had filed more complaints on behalf of the human delegation than any other single administrative action in his career, including all the reports, and there were many reports. The noise complaint was received. It was processed. It would be reviewed. Cale put his datapad away and watched the ceremony begin. The opening of the Galactic Convergence Games was a thing the galaxy took seriously in the way it took nothing else seriously, with genuine silence, and with the screen. The screen was not a screen in the way anyone who had never seen it would understand the word. It was the ledger. It was 4,000 years old. It was an AI that had been built by a civilization that no longer existed, and it had kept running, because nothing that had come after it was better, and everything that had come after it knew this, and so the galaxy maintained the ledger, the way you maintain a bridge you cannot replace, carefully, and with some unease. The ledger displayed. That was what it did. It looked at things and it declared what they were. Tier scores, capability ratings, species assessments. You could not argue with the ledger. You could not lobby it, or bribe it, or explain to it that circumstances had been difficult. It measured, and it said what it measured, and 4,000 years of measurement had never been wrong. The opening ceremony worked like this. Each species' greatest recorded achievement was displayed on the ledger's surface for the whole stadium to see. It was meant to be a celebration. It was also, in the way of all galaxy-wide events, a ranking. The Theresi's achievement appeared first. They had moved a star. Not the idea of a star, an actual star. 12 solar masses. Relocated 3 light-years from its original position as part of a planetary engineering project. The stadium lit up with appreciation sounds. The Theresi in the front row turned their luminescent heads toward each other and said nothing because they did not need to. The Drevak had cured a disease. Not one disease. A cascade of 11 related diseases, across 11 species simultaneously, using a single genetic intervention they had designed in 4 years. This was the kind of achievement that made the galaxy feel both grateful and slightly embarrassed. The Drevak sat with their characteristically motionless dignity, and received the sounds of the stadium like rainfall receives ground. Other species, other achievements. The stadium warmed and hummed. Then the ledger reached the human delegation. The screen turned toward row 47C. The human delegation applauded before anything appeared. They always did this. It was either an expression of enthusiasm or an expression of something else entirely, and Cale had never been certain which, and it was the kind of thing he could not put in a report without sounding like he was making things up. The ledger displayed, stubborn persistence under resource constraint, Tier 4 citation, Year 12 of registration. The stadium made no particular sound. The human delegation applauded this as well, politely, the way you applaud something that was what it was and could not be otherwise. Mara looked at the screen with the expression of a woman reading an invoice she had already checked 3 times and still found mildly wrong but not wrong enough to dispute. She opened her notebook. The notebook was not an impressive object. It was battered. The cover had been replaced once with a piece of canvas cut from a supply bag, and the corners were soft from handling, and there was a water stain on the back from an incident on a planet with unpredictable weather that Mara had never explained to anyone. She kept it in the inside pocket of her jacket, and the jacket showed the shape of it, a rectangle over her left ribs, the way old paper absorbs the shape of where it lives. She uncapped a pen. She wrote something. The pen moved quickly, with the efficiency of someone writing something they have thought about for a long time. Cale, 3 rows up, watched her. He had watched her do this before. He watched her do it at every Convergence Games. He had never seen what she wrote. He noted it in his report. Human primary liaison has again opened personal documentation device at start of ceremony. Contents unknown. Behavior consistent with prior cycles. He looked at the front row, where the Theresi were adjusting their ambient temperature settings. He looked back at row 47C, where the refreshment vendor had walked past again without stopping. He filed a refreshment complaint. After the ceremony, the human delegation ate. They ate because they had brought food. They always brought food. In the 7 hours between the opening ceremony and the social period, while other species were being attended to by the event's hospitality infrastructure, curation of species-specific nutrition, temperature-controlled distribution, individualized dietary consultation from a service AI that the Theresi had donated, the human delegation sat in row 47C and opened the bags they had carried in themselves. Mara ate a ration bar. It was the kind of ration bar that people ate when taste was not the point. It was dense and vaguely sweet, and made of things that would keep a person functional for a long time, under conditions that were not good. She ate half of it and put the other half back in her jacket pocket next to the notebook. Around her, the rest of the human delegation, 43 people, assorted, ate their own things. Some of them talked. Some of them laughed. One of them, a young engineer named Brecht who had never been to the Convergence Games before, was staring at the stadium with his mouth slightly open, the way people stared at things they had not yet finished understanding. "You'll close that eventually," Mara said to him, without looking up from the notebook. Brecht closed his mouth. "It gets smaller," she said. "The stadium. After a few days it stops being a thing you stare at, and starts being a thing you work in." "Work in," he repeated. "Yeah." He looked at her notebook. "What are you writing?" "Math," she said. He waited for more. She capped the pen. The social period was not well attended by humans. It never was. The social architecture of the Convergence Games was designed, like most things in the galaxy, around the species that had designed it, and the Theresi had designed it, and so it was graceful and luminous, and built around a form of fluid group conversation, in which multiple threads ran simultaneously, at a level of cognitive multitasking, that humans found somewhere between difficult and physiologically impossible. Cale found Mara at the edge of the social hall, in a corner near a structural column that blocked 2 of the 5 ambient sound channels. She was watching. Not watching in the way someone watches something pretty. Watching in the way someone watches a mechanism they are trying to understand from the outside, looking for the place where it could fail. He approached. He said formally, as he had said every 4 years for 19 years, "Is there anything your delegation requires?" She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of old concrete and about as readable. "We're good," she said. "We brought our own." He had no answer for this. He never had an answer for this. He noted it in his report. Delegation, self-sufficient, standard response given. Response received without additional context. He stood beside her for a moment, looking at the social hall. 3 more days, she said. Not to him, to herself. "Until the primary events?" he said. She looked at him. She was not surprised he had heard her. She was not surprised by much. "Until something," she said, and she went back to watching. Cale stood there for a moment longer than was professionally necessary. He filed a note to himself. Clarify meaning of 3 more days. He did not end up clarifying it that night. He went back to his quarters and wrote 7 reports about seating, refreshments, signage, ambient sound imbalance, a lighting discrepancy in the human delegation's tunnel that had existed for 6 years, the refreshment vendor situation, and the condition of the chair in row 47C that listed to the left. He sent all of them to the relevant departments. Then he opened a new document. He stared at it for a while. He wrote, "Human delegation behavior, consistent with prior cycles. Assessment of outcomes, pending." He did not know why he wrote pending. He had never written pending before. He had always written consistent and moved on. He closed the document. Outside, the stadium hummed with 400 civilizations going about their evening. The Theresi were doing something with light that required no explanation because it was self-evidently beautiful. The Drevak were running probability models on tomorrow's events. 11 other species were doing 11 other impressive things that would be noted and filed and celebrated at the appropriate time. In row 47C, a chair listed to the left with nobody in it. On the seat of the chair, someone had left a ration bar wrapper, folded precisely in half. The lesser events started on the second day, and the networks cut away before the first round was finished. This was not a decision anyone made consciously. It was a decision made by ratings, which were a kind of consciousness all their own, a slow, aggregate thing that learned over decades what 400 species found worth watching, and had concluded, with statistical confidence, that the lesser events were not it. The lesser events were zero-gravity debris navigation, multi-atmospheric endurance assessment, composite problem-solving under sensory constraint, and environmental survival. A 6-hour test conducted on a rotating set of hostile terrain simulations. They were the events designed for species without an obvious biological advantage. No natural flight, no aquatic processing, no bioluminescent communication. Events where the edge, if you had one, had to come from somewhere else. The human team entered all 4 of them. This was consistent with prior cycles, so nobody noted it as remarkable. Kale noted it in his report. Human delegation has registered for all preliminary bracket events, consistent with registration patterns from cycles 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and moved on to the next item, which was a follow-up on his seating complaint from the previous year. The follow-up had not been processed. He filed a follow-up to the follow-up. Mara sat in the observation tier with the notebook open on her knee. She had been assigned an observation seat with the other delegation support staff. It was a better view than row 47C, which sat too low and too far left for a clean sightline to the primary floor. The observation tier was functional, high enough, centered, with a clear angle to all 4 simultaneous event floors. She had requested it 3 years ago through Kale, who had filed the request and been surprised when it was granted, and then had written a note to himself to investigate why it had been granted when other requests had not, and had never found time to investigate. She watched the zero-gravity debris navigation. It was the first event of the morning. The floor of the stadium reconfigured itself, a thing the floor did with a sound like very large machinery agreeing with itself, and the debris field materialized in the null gravity chamber above it. 47 species had entered this event. Each team sent 1 navigator. The rules were simple. Cross the field, reach the other side, fastest time with best form wins. Form was scored by a panel of Theresi officials. They had always been the form judges. It had never been questioned, because they were the most aesthetically developed civilization in the registered galaxy, which was a fact that everyone acknowledged without enjoying. The human navigator, a woman named Solis, compact and quiet, who had spent 4 years as a debris salvage specialist on a station with a failing gravity array, crossed the field in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. She placed 7th out of 47 by final score. Mara wrote something in the notebook. Her time had been 4th best. The form penalty had cost her 3 positions. The Theresi panel had flagged her technique as non-standard, not inefficient. Mara had noticed that too. Just not the way the Theresi expected it to look. Not luminous, not smooth. More like something designed by a person who had learned in an environment where being wrong meant drifting into a debris wall at speed. Mara circled what she had written. "That's a thing that's happening," she said to nobody. The second event was the multi-atmospheric endurance assessment. 6 different atmospheric compositions, cycling every 40 minutes. You had to keep working. What work meant was different for each species. For the Drevak it was computational output maintenance. For the humans it was a standardized physical and cognitive task battery. The event measured how much a species degraded under atmospheric stress. Humans, it turned out, degraded less than expected. They placed 4th. No form penalty this time. The Theresi panel had not watched closely enough to apply one. Kale noted the result and began writing it into his daily summary. He stopped. He looked at the 4th place result for a long time. Then he looked at the 7th place result from the morning. Then he looked at them both together, which was a different thing from looking at them separately. A 7th place result and a 4th place result were each, individually, respectable for a Tier 4 species. Together, with the time penalty information from the first event, they were something his report software did not have a category for. He opened a new document and wrote, "Note for personal reference. Human delegation 4th in multi-atmospheric endurance. Time penalty not applied. Morning result affected by form deduction, not performance. Query. Are the 2 results measuring the same thing?" He stared at the query for a while. He did not answer it. He filed the daily summary and went to find dinner, which was not a thing the event hospitality structure provided for him without effort, because his species' dietary requirements were unusual enough to require advance arrangement, which he had arranged, because in 19 years he had learned to bring his own things too, even if he would not have phrased it that way. The third day brought the composite problem-solving event. It was the most demanding of the preliminary events. A 20-stage test run simultaneously across cognitive, environmental, and physical domains. You could not specialize. You could not send your best thinker or your strongest body. You sent a team, and the team had to be everything at once. The human team entered 14 people. This was not remarkable. Most teams were between 8 and 20 members. What was not typical, what Cale noticed only because he had spent 3 days noticing things he would not ordinarily have noticed, was how quiet they were. Human teams were not usually quiet. In every prior cycle Cale had documented, the human delegation communicated loudly, continuously, with a level of spoken word overlap that suggested their species had evolved in an environment where everyone talked at once and somehow managed. It was charming and somewhat disorganizing, and it was what humans did. This team said almost nothing. They moved through the staging area in 2 single-file lines. When they needed to communicate, they used their hands. Brief, precise movements, not improvised gestures, Cale noted, but a system. Practiced, deliberate, the kind of hand communication you developed when you needed to talk in a place where talking was not safe, or not possible, or where speed mattered enough that words were too slow. They entered the event floor. Cale watched them from the administrative gallery. He was not supposed to be in the administrative gallery. His credential level was 1 step below it, but he had filed a professional development request 3 weeks before the games that had been approved without scrutiny. And so here he was, with a better view than he was entitled to, watching a team of humans move through a problem-solving event in near silence. They placed third, out of 31 teams. Third. Cale sat with this for a full minute before opening his datapad. He began writing his report and found that the standard language was not landing correctly. He had written placed third in composite problem-solving, consistent with improving trend, and then read it back and understood that the word consistent was no longer the right word for what he was looking at. Improving was not consistent. Improving was something else, something that had a direction. He deleted the sentence. He wrote, human delegation placed third in composite problem-solving, communication method during event, nonverbal, systematic, apparently prearranged. System not observed in prior cycles. Note, this may require follow-up. He flagged the document as priority review. He had never flagged a human delegation report as priority review before. He found Mara that evening in the refreshment corridor near the human delegation section, the corridor that was, again, unstaffed, the corridor where the vendor never stopped. She was leaning against the wall eating the second half of what appeared to be a ration bar from the previous day, and she had the notebook open on top of a supply crate she was using as a surface, and she was writing in it with the focused attention of someone finishing a calculation they had been running for a long time. He approached, he said, formally, because formal was what he knew how to do. Is there anything your delegation requires? She looked up. We're good, she said. We brought our own. Same words. Same flat delivery. He had heard these exact words from her for 19 years, and they had always meant the same thing, which was, the answer to your question is no. Tonight they felt like they meant something additional. He stood there. 30 meters away, around a corner, the Terran delegation's refreshment setup occupied a full wing of the corridor. Bioluminescent catering, ambient temperature individually calibrated, a service AI that anticipated needs before they were expressed. He could see the edge of the light from where he stood. He looked at Mara's ration bar. He looked at the notebook. He said, and this surprised him, because he had not planned to say anything further, you placed third today. We did, she said. In composite problem solving. Yeah. That is, he searched for the professional language, an improved result. It is, she said. She looked at him steadily, not challenging him, just looking, the way she looked at the stadium floor, like she was trying to understand how something worked from the outside. He said, the communication system your team used during the event. She waited. I haven't seen it before, he said, in prior cycles. She nodded, once. No, she said, you wouldn't have. He waited for more. She ate the last of the ration bar and folded the wrapper in half along the same crease as the one he had found on the chair the previous night. She put it in her jacket pocket. 3 more days, she said again. He opened his datapad. He looked at his complaint queue. 11 items. Seating, refreshments, signage, Lighting, vendor non-attendance at human delegation refreshment station. This one he had filed twice, once to general services and once to hospitality review, which was a different department. He filed it a third time, to a third department, one that actually moved things. He had not filed to that department before. It required a level of specificity he had always considered excessive for a refreshment concern. He was not certain why tonight was different. He walked back to his quarters through the main corridor where the Theresi lights made everything soft and gold. He passed 17 other species on the way, all of them attended to, all of them in the glow of an infrastructure that had been built, over 400 years of convergence games, to serve them. He passed a service AI that offered him an environmental comfort assessment. He declined it. He went to his room and opened his personal notes document. He looked at the line he had written the previous night. Human delegation behavior, consistent with prior cycles. Assessment of outcomes, pending. He deleted the word consistent. He stared at the gap it left. He did not fill it. Not yet. He saved the document and closed it, and sat for a while in the dark of a room that was the correct temperature and adequately lit and provisioned with everything his species required, and thought about a woman eating a day-old ration bar in an empty corridor, writing something in a battered notebook that she called math. The notification arrived at 0640 on the fourth day, and Kale read it 3 times before he accepted that he had read it correctly. He checked the sender authentication, valid. He checked the event bracket data it referenced, correct. He opened a separate file and compared the human delegation's preliminary scores against the bracket entry threshold, calculating it himself rather than trusting the summary, because summaries could have errors and he was the kind of person who checked. The scores matched. The threshold was met. There was no error. The human delegation had qualified for the primary event bracket. He sat with this for 60 seconds, which was a very long time for him to sit without doing something. Then he filed a verification request with the bracket authority, which came back confirmed in 4 minutes because bracket data was one of the things the game's infrastructure processed quickly. It had to, because the bracket was the thing everyone cared about. The confirmation was clear and plain and left no room for alternative interpretation. Humans, primary bracket, day 4. He had been managing human relations for 19 years. He had attended 7 convergence game cycles. In those 7 cycles, the human delegation had never qualified for the primary event bracket, not once, not come close. The bracket entry threshold was not a secret. It was published. It was consistent. It had not changed. And in 7 cycles, the human delegation's accumulated preliminary scores had cleared somewhere between 60 and 70% of what was needed. This cycle they had cleared 103%. He went to find Mara. She was already suited up when he found her. The human team's event gear was not impressive to look at. Matte gray, functional, the kind of equipment designed by people who cared a great deal about what it did, and not at all about what it looked like. She had the jacket on and the collar fastened, and she was checking something on her wrist panel with the focused attention of someone confirming rather than discovering. Her expression was exactly the same as it was when she ate a ration bar, or read an invoice, or sat in a chair that listed to the left. It was the expression of someone who had already decided. He said, "You qualified." "We did," she said. "For the primary bracket." "Yeah." He stood there. He had prepared, on the walk over, a series of professional questions about the team's readiness, about delegation support requirements, about any administrative needs the primary bracket entry created. None of them came out. What came out instead was, "How?" She looked at him. "Math," she said. He waited. She checked her wrist panel one more time, then lowered her arm. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at the stadium floor, like she was deciding something. "We lost the right events," she said. The debris navigation took the form penalty on purpose, went for time, banked the points in the correct scoring category. Atmospheric endurance, we went clean. No penalties, solid finish, different scoring pool. Combined with the problem-solving result, we had enough to hit the threshold. He was processing this. "You lost events deliberately." "We placed 7th when we could have placed 4th, she said. "Yeah. The form penalty cost us 3 positions but saved us 17 scoring points in the category that didn't matter for bracket qualification. The points we needed were in a different category. We put them there." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You planned this. For 3 years, she said. "Kale, we brought our own food." 3 years. He kept coming back to this number as he walked back to the administrative gallery. 3 years before this cycle, Mara had filed a request for observation tier seating that had been granted. 3 years before this cycle, she had started bringing the notebook, or had she always had it? He scrolled back through his reports from prior cycles and found references to personal documentation but could not determine when it had started. The references were generic. He had not thought to be specific. He had not thought to be specific about a great many things regarding the human delegation, because there had been nothing that required specificity. They were Tier 4. Adequate. They arrived, they competed in the lesser events, they placed in the middle of the field, they ate their own food, and they went home. This was the shape of the thing. He had filed this shape 7 times in 7 cycles and had never found it necessary to look at it closely. He thought about the notebook. He thought about a hand signal system that had appeared in the preliminary events and had not been seen in any prior cycle. A system that was practiced and precise, the kind of thing you built over time in a room, with the people who were going to use it, drilling it until it was fast enough to be useful. He thought about the observation tier seating request, the specific angle it provided, the clear sightline to all 4 simultaneous event floors. He thought about 3 years of ration bars eaten in empty corridors, and a woman who said math and meant something large by it, and a notebook he had never seen the inside of. He went to the administrative gallery and sat down and looked at the primary event floor being configured below him. The floor was becoming something new, the multi-domain challenge setup, which required the entire surface and 3 elevated platforms and 4 environmental adjustment zones. He had seen it configured before. It was always impressive. It was the event the galaxy came to see, the one where the Theresi usually won, and the Drevik occasionally placed second, and everyone else arranged themselves in the tiers below that, and received their scores with the grace of species who had been losing beautifully for a long time. He thought, the human team has been watching this event for 3 cycles, from a bad angle in row 47C. He thought, they asked for a better angle. He thought, she has been mapping something. She showed him the notebook that afternoon. Not all of it, just the first page of the section that started 3 years ago. The section that was not preliminary event notes, not schedule analysis, not the logistical planning she obviously did for the delegation. The section that had a different quality to the handwriting, as though it had been written slowly and carefully, and returned to many times. He looked at the page. It was a list of species. Every species seated ahead of the humans in the stadium. 22 of them, in the first section. Each name had 2 columns of annotation beside it. The first column was an event type, specific, technical, the kind of event terminology you knew only if you had studied the games in depth. The second column was a note, brief, in handwriting that was smaller than her normal writing, the kind of writing you used when you were putting down something you wanted to remember precisely. He read the annotations. Then he read them again. Each annotation identified, for a specific species, the type of problem that caused their decision-making to fail. Not fail completely. These were advanced civilizations. They did not simply collapse, but pause, lock, choose the wrong branch at a critical moment because their cognitive architecture, which was brilliant for most things, had a shape that did not fit a specific kind of challenge. And beside each species name was the event, the specific scenario, the exact conditions, where Mara had seen this happen. The Theresi entry was near the bottom. She had circled it. He read it. He read it a second time to make sure he had understood it. Then he looked at her. You've seen them fail, he said. The Theresi. I've seen them pause, she said. Twice, in 2 different cycles. The same type of problem both times. A specific kind of adaptive scenario. The problem changes shape faster than their prediction models can update. Their architecture is built for pattern recognition. Exceptional pattern recognition. But if the pattern breaks faster than the recognition cycle, they lose 2 to 3 seconds recalibrating. 2 to 3 seconds is nothing, he said. In this event, she said, it's everything. He looked at the entry beside the Theresi name. At the second column, at what she had written there, in the small, precise handwriting. There was a star drawn beside it, not drawn recently. The ink was different, older, slightly faded. She had drawn the star before this cycle, before the previous cycle. The ink was 5 years old, maybe more. You've been waiting for this type of problem to appear, he said. Watching for it, she said. There was no guarantee it would. It's rare. It showed up twice in 400 years of event history. But the event conditions that create it are predictable, if you know what to look for. And this cycle's environmental parameters are, she paused. The math was good. The probability was high enough. He looked at the star for a long time. And if it doesn't appear, he said, if the problem type doesn't show up in today's event, then we finish where we finish, she said. We go home. We eat our food. We come back in 4 years. She said it without bitterness and without bravado. She said it the way you state a fact about weather. Here is the condition. Here is what follows from it. He looked at the notebook in her hand, at the years of small handwriting, at the star drawn in old ink beside a name that had not lost in 400 years. "What do you train for?" he said. "If you don't know, the problem will appear." She put the notebook back in her jacket pocket. She smoothed the canvas cover flat against her ribs. She looked at the event floor below them, where the multi-domain challenge configuration was almost complete. "We train for the break," she said. "Not the pattern, the break." She walked toward the staging area. He stood in the gallery and watched her go, and he felt something he did not have professional language for, and he did not try to find it. He opened his datapad. He wrote a note to himself that said only, "the break," not the pattern. He did not know yet why he needed to remember this. He closed the datapad and went back to his seat. His professional development credential got him into the gallery but not into the prime observation area, and so he found the best position available to him, which was at the corner of a railing above the third staging zone, and from there he could see everything, and the event was about to start. And for the first time in 19 years of filing reports about human delegation activities, he did not open a new document first. He just watched. The multi-domain challenge began at 0900, and the Theresi were magnificent. There was no other word for it. They moved through the first phase of the event the way they did everything, with a grace that did not look like effort, because for them it was not effort, it was expression. The physical domain opened first, a reconstruction task on a destabilized platform, and the Theresi team solved it in the way a musician solves a difficult passage, which is by understanding the structure of it so deeply that the solution arrives before the problem is fully stated. The stadium responded. The networks that had cut away from the preliminary events were watching now. The ledger's secondary displays tracked their scores in real time, climbing steadily, accumulating the kind of lead that made the rest of the bracket feel like a formality. The Drevik were second. They were always second when the Theresi competed. They approached the event with the same motionless precision they brought to everything, and they were extraordinary, and it was not enough, and they knew it. And they continued anyway because they were the Drevok, and continuing was what they did with the gap between themselves and first place. The human team was third. This was noted by the secondary displays and by no one watching the primary coverage, because the primary coverage was on the Theresi, and the human team was third in the way a lamp is third when you are standing in front of a star, present, functional, not the thing you are looking at. In the gallery, Kale gripped the railing with two of his four upper limbs. He did not know why. He had been standing at this railing for 30 minutes and the grip had begun somewhere in the middle of the physical domain phase and had not released. He was aware of it in the peripheral part of his mind that tracks body behavior. He did not release the grip. He watched. The cognitive domain opened at 10:47. This was the part of the event that the Theresi handled best, which was saying something. The cognitive domain was a layered problem structure, each layer built on the previous one, each solution unlocking the next challenge, and the challenges were adaptive, which meant they changed in response to each team's approach. They were not designed to reward any single type of thinking. They were designed to reward the depth and speed of thinking, under the assumption that depth and speed at the highest level looked the same regardless of which species did it. The Theresi moved through the cognitive layers with a speed that the secondary displays could barely track. They were ahead by a margin that the bracket algorithm flagged, in its neutral and mechanical way, as potentially insurmountable. The Drevok were keeping pace with their own version of the same approach. Systematic, thorough, fast. Other species in the bracket were doing their best work, and their best work was placing them between 5th and 14th. The human team was third, then third again. The scoreboard showed the number without emphasis, because the scoreboard did not have a way to express emphasis. Kale had let go of the railing long enough to file a brief status update, and had then gripped it again without noticing. At 11:34, the problem cascade reached its fourth layer, and then, without signal or announcement, the event delivered a Type 7 adaptive fold. Kale did not know what a Type 7 adaptive fold was. He had not known to learn this. He had, in the previous 4 days, become a person who knew more about the convergence games than he had known in all 19 prior years combined, but he had not gotten as far as event-specific terminology for rare scenario variants. He did not know that what he was watching, as the fourth layer of the cognitive domain suddenly shifted its structure mid-challenge, was something that had happened only twice in 400 years of competition. He knew only what he saw. The Theresi paused. It was a small pause, 1.2 seconds, which the timer confirmed and which was, in the context of the event, significant enough that the secondary displays registered a score adjustment. 1.2 seconds during which the Theresi team, the most cognitively advanced civilization in the registered galaxy, The species that had moved a star encountered a problem that did not look like any pattern they had seen before, and their pattern recognition, which was extraordinary, needed time to recalibrate. The human team did not pause. They moved, not gracefully. The movement looked wrong at first, asymmetrical, like something assembled in haste from parts that did not quite match. 2 members went left when the obvious solution path was right. 3 members began working on what appeared to be the previous layer's problem structure, rather than the new one. It looked like confusion. It was not confusion. Cale understood this before he understood how he understood it. He had read those words, the break, not the pattern. And he had not known then what they meant, but he had filed them anyway. And now they came back to him standing at the railing watching a team move through a broken problem like people who had practiced for exactly this. The 2 who went left were not wrong. They were running the backup approach, the one that worked when the main path failed, the one they had built for the moment when the pattern shattered. The 3 working on the previous layer were not confused. They were anchoring, maintaining the structural work already done so it would not degrade while the forward team handled the new condition. The hand signals went between them, brief, precise. The language of people who had built a system for a broken environment and practiced it until it was fast enough to matter. The secondary displays updated. Third, second. The Theresi recovered. They were magnificent about it. Their recovery was itself a kind of excellence, a demonstration that even their recalibration was faster than most species' best work. They came back. They closed the gap. In the final section of the cognitive domain they were performing at a level that should have been decisive. It was not decisive. The human team held second through the environmental domain. They held it through the strategic assessment phase. In the final composite scoring, as the event closed and the bracket algorithm aggregated results across all 4 domains, physical, cognitive, environmental, strategic, the numbers moved on the secondary displays in a sequence that the primary network coverage was not prepared for. The cameras found the human team, not because anyone directed them to, because the cameras were also automated, and automated systems followed the numbers, and the numbers were saying something the cameras had not expected to say. The ledger took longer than usual. Not long in absolute terms, 12 seconds, where a normal scoring cycle took 4. But the ledger was 4,000 years old, and in 4,000 years it had not taken longer than usual. The stadium noticed this the way you notice when a sound you have always heard stops. A 12-second silence from a system that did not pause. 400 species held something that was not breath, because not all of them breathed, but was the same thing breath holding is, the body waiting for information that was coming and had not arrived yet. The great screen turned. It turned toward row 47C. It held there, and the projection beam, the ancient system's attention, the thing it pointed at things when it was about to declare them, landed on the human delegation section, on the worn seats and the wrong sign above the tunnel entrance, and the 43 people sitting in gear that did not catch the light. The ledger spoke. Its voice was the same as it had always been. No volume, no inflection. Just the voice of a thing that stated what was true. Muddy closing ceremony was held the following morning, and for the first time in 61 years of human registration, the human delegation was offered better seating. The offer came in the form of a formal notification from event management, reclassified to primary tier seating, effective immediately, with an apology for the previous arrangement that was worded in the careful bureaucratic language of institutions that do not apologize naturally, and are doing it anyway because the situation has made it unavoidable. Mara read the notification. She showed it to Cale. He read it and said, "I filed 32 seating complaints over 7 cycles." "I know," she said. 32. "I know." They went to the new seats. Mara sat down. The new seat also listed slightly. To the left. She did not adjust it. Cale looked at this for a moment. He did not comment. He wrote a note in his personal file. New seating also defective. File complaint. He put the datapad away and watched the ceremony begin. The ceremony was a large thing that took a long time and contained many speeches. The Theresi spoke. The head of the games authority spoke. A representative from the body that oversaw the ledger's operational continuity spoke, which was notable because that representative had not spoken at a closing ceremony in 40 years, because the ledger did not require commentary from the body that maintained it. It simply declared, and the declaration stood, and that had always been sufficient. Today the representative spoke for 6 minutes about what the reclassification meant for the historical record, and what the new category designation, unclassified adaptive apex, indicated about the structure of the tier system, and what it suggested for how the galaxy thought about capability, and capability thresholds, and the question of what forms of intelligence had been measured well by the existing framework, and what forms had not been measured well at all. The 6 minutes were dense and careful, and several species found them deeply interesting, and several others found them procedurally necessary, and the humans mostly listened with the cheerful, engaged chaos that was apparently intact under all the strategy. People leaning over to explain things to each other, someone's datapad falling off a knee and being caught, Brecht asking the person next to him a question that caused 3 other people to turn around and join the answer. Mara listened with her hands folded in her lap and the notebook in her jacket pocket, and the expression she always had. The Theresi were gracious. They were always gracious. It was structural to them, a quality built into how they moved through the world, and it had never cost them very much before because they had never been in a position where graciousness required absorbing something difficult. Today it cost them something small, and they were gracious anyway. They congratulated the human delegation in 3 different formal registers, each appropriate to a different relational context, and their primary representative found Mara and said, in the direct communication style the Theresi used with other species' primary representatives, "We did not see you coming." Mara said, "No." The Theresi representative waited, as the Theresi always waited when they expected elaboration. "We were 3 rows back," Mara said. The representative considered this. "You were always 3 rows back," they said, "across 7 cycles." "Yes." Another pause. The Theresi were extraordinary at pauses. The position gave you a particular view of the event floor. "It did," Mara said. The representative looked at her for a moment with the kind of attention that the Theresi brought to things they were revising their understanding of. Then they said, "We will see you at the next cycle." It was not a threat, and it was not a courtesy. It was a statement of anticipated conditions, the recognition of a new variable in a system they had previously understood completely. "Yeah," Mara said, "you will." The press came in waves, the way press always did after something the galaxy had not expected. 47 separate media organizations across 22 species wanted interviews. The human delegation's communications team handled this with a competence that surprised no one who had been paying attention, and surprised everyone who hadn't been. Mara gave one interview. A Drevuk journalist. They were the best interviewers in the registered galaxy, patient and precise and willing to sit in silence until the answer came. Asked her a single question. "What does Tier 8 mean for humanity?" She was quiet for a moment. Not because she did not know the answer, she always knew the answer, but because she was choosing the right one out of several that were true. "Same thing Tier 4 meant," she said. "We show up." The journalist waited. They had excellent waiting skills. "We brought our own food this time too," she said. The journalist wrote this down. It was, in the way of good answers, both simpler and more complicated than anything else she could have said, and its meaning multiplied the longer you held it, and the journalist held it for a long time before putting the datapad away. The vendor came to row 47C at 1600 hours, 2 hours before the delegation prepared to depart. He came with a full cart, and the slightly embarrassed efficiency of someone doing something that should have been done much earlier and is compensating through thoroughness. He offered 7 types of nutrition options, 3 beverage formats, and a formal apology on behalf of event hospitality that had been transmitted to him that morning, and that he delivered word for word, which suggested he had practiced it. The human delegation received him warmly. This was the other side of the thing that was true about them. They did not hold the 11 years of empty corridors against the specific person standing in front of them now. They took what was offered and they said thank you, and they meant it, and a few of them, including Brecht, asked the vendor questions about his species and his cart and his route through the stadium with the genuine interest of people who were interested in things and showed it. The vendor left looking like someone who had expected something other than what he received. Mara watched him go. She did not take anything from the cart. She had a ration bar in her jacket pocket, the same kind as always, and she ate half of it and put the other half back. "Sergeant," Brecht said, sitting down next to her. His mouth was no longer falling open at things. He had, as she had predicted, stopped staring and started working. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "With the tier." "With Tier 8. Does anything change?" He paused. "For us, does it change how we're treated, where we sit, whether they—" He gestured vaguely at the space around them, at the stadium, at everything the stadium contained and represented. Mara looked at the seat in front of her. The new seating was in a better section, better lighting, better angle. No vendor problem. The seat still listed to the left. "Some things change," she said, "the ones that are easy to change. Seating assignments, vendor routes. Who bothers to learn your name?" She looked at him. "The rest of it changes the way heavy things change. which is slowly and with a lot of friction. You push it, it moves eventually. How long does eventually take? He asked. She thought about this honestly. Longer than a cycle, she said. Less than forever. Somewhere in there. He nodded. He was processing this with the seriousness of someone who had signed up for a long thing and was now getting an honest briefing on how long it actually was. Okay, he said, finally. I can work with that. Good, she said. You'll need to. The stadium emptied slowly, in the way large things empty, the biggest civilizations with the most retinue going first, the smaller delegations gathering their things in the quieter hours, until the space that had been full of 400 species and their sounds and their lights and their ambient temperature adjustments was mostly open and a little cold. Mara stayed. She stayed until the human delegation had boarded their transport, all 43 of them, plus Brecht, who turned back 3 times to look at the stadium from the boarding ramp and had to be directed forward each time. She stayed until the logistics staff had processed the equipment and the formal closing documentation had been filed and the event floor was beginning its multi-day reconfiguration back to neutral state. She went back to row 47C, the original row, the wrong sign still above the tunnel entrance. The seats still their original selves, not the upgraded ones. Those were 2 sections over. These were just what they had always been, the seats of a species that had been seated here for 11 years, that had eaten ration bars here, and watched the events and filed complaints that went into queues and waited with a patience that was not the patience of contentment, but the patience of work. She sat down, her seat, the one that listed to the left. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. The page was blank. She wrote something at the top, not a species name, a number. Kale, who had come back in the way he had come back to places where she was for the last several days without quite deciding to, watched from the tunnel entrance. He was too far away to read the number. He did not go closer. He had a data pad in his hand that he was not using. Under the number, she began a list. New names. He could see the shape of the writing from where he stood. The same small, precise handwriting. The same 2-column structure. Annotations, patterns. The early notes of a framework that did not yet have its full shape but was being built, line by line, in the last light of a stadium that was going quiet. She was already watching the next cycle. The ledger screen was dark above the empty floor. Tier 8 was on the record now, in a category that had not existed yesterday, in a system 4,000 years old, that had never before needed to make a new one. It would not be erased. The ledger did not erase things. It declared them and they became part of the permanent architecture of what was known. Kale stood at the tunnel entrance for a long time. He should have been on his transport. He had a report to file, 47 completed and 3 more waiting, and a summary document for his department head, and a personal notes file that had been growing all week with entries he had not yet found the right professional language for. He had been managing human relations for 19 years because nobody wanted the posting. It was considered a minor assignment, a courtesy role, the kind of thing given to someone competent but not needed elsewhere. A job that required patience and administrative thoroughness, and a tolerance for the small indignities of filing complaints that were received and processed and not acted upon. He thought about the refreshment complaint he had filed to a new department 3 days ago. He thought about it arriving and being acted on the same day, and the vendor appearing with a full cart 2 hours before departure. Small, but not nothing. The kind of thing that happened when you filed to the right place instead of the habitual one. The kind of thing that happened when you decided, after 19 years, to stop going through the motions of care and start actually doing it. He opened his data pad. He opened his personal notes file. He had one more thing to write there, one more entry in the document that was supposed to be a professional log, but had become something he did not have a clean category for, a record of a week in which he had started watching something he had only been filing before. He wrote, Human delegation has begun preparation for next convergence cycle. Behavior, consistent. Assessment, inadequate word. Reclassification of assessment, pending. He saved it. He closed the datapad. In row 47C, Mara wrote another line in the notebook, then another. The new list was growing. Kale thought about the next cycle. 4 years. 4 years was a long time. It was also, he was beginning to understand, not very long at all for a person who brought their own food and meant something large by it. There was an opening in his department, he knew. A senior position. Better posting. Different civilization, better facilities, more resources. The kind of assignment you put in a request for when you had done your time in the minor postings and were ready for something more significant. He put the datapad in his bag. He had a posting to consider. He would not request the transfer if one was offered. He did not examine this decision, he just made it, the way she made the decisions that showed up later as math, quietly, in advance, without announcing them to anyone. He walked out of the tunnel entrance and into the corridors of the emptying stadium, and he did not look back, because he did not need to. He knew what was happening in row 47C, the same thing that had always been happening there, the thing that required no announcement and no fanfare and no comfortable chair. Mara Voss was writing the next list. She would be there when the stadium refilled in 4 years. She would be 3 rows back from wherever the next good seat was, watching with the concrete gray eyes and the notebook and the patience of a person who understood that showing up, in itself, was not the strategy. The strategy was knowing why you were showing up, and she always knew why.